Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. Forget the knights in shining armor for a moment. Because if you've traveled back to the Middle Ages, roughly the 5th to the 15th century, 9 out of every 10 people you met would be peasants, the true foundation of society. Their life was a constant, exhausting marathon of farming that kept the entire medieval world running, ensuring everyone, from the humblest baby to the grandest king, had food to eat. The vast majority of these people were serfs, legally tied to the soil, meaning their daily life was governed entirely by the sun, not clocks. Unlike the few free tenants or villains who had better rights, a serf could not leave the manor without the lord's explicit permission. Their lives were dictated by their birth status. They were born on the land and they would die on the land. Below the serfs were the cotters, who held only a cottage and a tiny garden plot, relying heavily on hiring themselves out as laborers to others, in exchange for the lord's protection and the right to farm a portion of the land. Every single person was obligated to the lord. A peasant's humble home, often called a hovel, was purely functional, not fancy. It was built quickly using local materials like wattle and daba, woven lattice of sticks covered in mud and clay and topped with a thick, insulating thatch roof of straw or reeds. The whole family, often including grandparents and several children, lived together in just one room, meaning privacy was a completely foreign concept, and they slept on straw mattresses, sometimes even sharing the space and warmth. With their few chickens or pigs, the air inside was perpetually hazy because the fire pit in the center, used for cooking and heat, had no chimney. The smoke simply found its way out through a hole in the roof or the walls. Given the utter lack of sanitation where human and animal waste was often simply tossed into the village street or a shallow pit too. Close to the drinking well disease was a constant, terrifying threat. Life expectancy was low, and infant mortality was tragically high, making the simple act of surviving to adulthood a significant achievement. A peasant's clothing was based on durability and warmth, not fashion. They wore rough, undyed wool or linen flax garments. Men wore a long linen tunic, tied with a rope belt, covered by a wool smock or coat for work, along with simple brise drawstring trousers and rough leather boots or clogs. Women wore a linen chemise beneath a long wool dress or gown. Clothing was expensive and time-consuming to make, so most peasants owned only 1 or 2 sets of clothes, which were worn until they fell apart. While formal bathing was rare, they understood the importance of cleanliness. Clothes were washed, boiled infrequently, perhaps a few times a year, using lye soap made from animal fat and ash. Most grooming involved cutting their hair short for men and covering it with a cap or a wimple for women, to keep dirt and lice out. The rhythm of life was set by the fields and the introduction of advanced, albeit backbreaking, technology. The land itself was managed by the 3-field system to maximize yield. 1 field was dedicated to winter crops like wheat, 1 to spring crops like oats and barley, or legumes like peas and beans, which helped replenish nitrogen, and 1 was left fallow, empty each year to restore the soil's fertility. The innovation that truly changed their work was the heavy-wheeled plow, known as the karuka. Unlike simple tools, the karuka had an iron share, a mold board, and wheels, allowing it to cut deep into the dense, heavy soil of northern Europe. This advanced plow required immense power, often needing 8 oxen, and was therefore shared communally by the entire village, a perfect example of their cooperative lifestyle. Another major advancement was the horse collar, which, unlike previous harnesses, didn't choke the horse, allowing them to use the faster, more efficient horse, though still less common than the ox, for plowing and hauling. The village wasn't just a cluster of houses, it was an organized community. Land outside the strips was the village common land, which was crucial. Peasants had rights to graze their cattle and pigs there, and they had the right to gather firewood, timber, and building materials from the local woods and forest. Decisions and appointments were made collectively, often through the lord's officials. The bailiff managed the whole manor for the lord. While the reeve was a peasant appointed or elected by his peers to supervise the daily agricultural work and ensure everyone showed up for their labor duty on the domain. The work in the fields was generally segregated by gender, though everyone worked during the critical harvest rush. Men were responsible for the heavy, physical labor, the plowing, the sowing of seeds, the reaping, cutting of the grain, and the essential maintenance of tools and fences. Women played an equally vital and intense role. Their domain included the domestic sphere, preparing all meals and brewing ale daily, caring for small livestock like chickens and pigs, managing the kitchen garden, which provided the necessary flavoring and vegetables for pottage, and performing tasks like spinning and weaving the raw wool into cloth during the winter. They were also responsible for fetching wood and water, which were demanding daily chores. During harvest, women were often responsible for the crucial task of winnowing, tossing the threshed grain into the air to let the breeze carry away the lighter chaff. The peasants' primary job was to support the entire feudal system and for the right to live on the manor. They had to pay the lord in 3 exhausting and non-negotiable ways. The largest payment was labor. Serfs had to spend at least 3 days a week working for free on the lord's private best land, called the domain. Second, they had to pay rent by handing over a substantial portion of their own successful harvest, perhaps 1/10 of their grain, along with taxes paid in goods like eggs, chickens, or honey, since cash money was rare. Beyond these fixed duties, they were often subjected to arbitrary taxes, the tallage, an unpredictable sum the lord could demand without warning. The harriet, a terrifying death tax where the lord took the family's best beast or piece of property upon the death of the household. And the murchet, a fine paid to the lord to grant permission for a serf's daughter to marry someone outside the manor. Third, they paid banalities, monopoly fees to use the lord's essential property, such as the mill or the oven. Furthermore, they were forced to pay a mandatory 1/10 of all their earnings or produce to the central church for all disputes and minor criminal matters. Peasants were subject to the lord's authority through the manorial court. This was less a court of justice and more a vehicle for the lord to enforce his rules and collect fines. Peasants would gather periodically to witness cases involving small thefts, boundary disputes over land strips, failure to perform labor duties, or fighting. Fines paid to the lord were the primary form of punishment. The peasant diet was repetitive, heavy, and functional, providing the massive amount of calories needed for their labor. The undisputed king of calories was pottage, a thick, hearty stew made by boiling whatever grains, beans, peas, and tough vegetables, cabbages, onions were available. Ale was the main beverage, not water, as the boiling process during brewing made it much safer and healthier than the often contaminated village water sources. Meat was a major luxury and rarely seen. They relied on domestic animals like pork. Pigs were easier to keep, chicken, or supplemented with snaring small game. The diet was heavily reliant on heavy, dark bread made from rye or barley. Despite the grind, life wasn't without structure and celebration. The local church was the indisputable center of the community, and the parish priest acted as the social, spiritual, and moral compass. While official Catholicism provided the framework, the peasants' spiritual life was rich with superstition and local folklore. They believed in forest spirits, curses, and magical charms, blending ancient pagan beliefs with Christian faith. The church calendar offered the essential breaks they craved, as religious feast days totaling perhaps 50 to 60 days a year strictly forbade all work. These festivals were major social events. Occasionally, a trade fair would pass through the area or be held in a nearby town, offering peasants their only chance to buy items like metal tools, salt or high-quality cloth, and to trade their surplus goods. They enjoyed simple, rough games like wrestling and chaotic early forms of football, and in the long winter nights their only mass entertainment came from gathering around the smoky fire pit to share stories and sing songs, finding simple happiness in community and shared tradition. Year after relentless year,